it's not generic what you describe, but that is like the business problem for every executive. You have this question, and then the data is always out of date. It takes a team and a study to figure it out, and you still have to move anyway. And this is like a very common, I feel like I've seen a version of this also in like manufacturing. They want to know like, can we install the machine? Like, well, all the drawings are out of date and we don't even know what's there. And it's very similar. I'm curious, especially thinking of your background, how do you go from tackling this problem to, I can actually sell this software, which must have been expensive to develop, especially when you started. How did you go about finding your first customer for something like this?
I'll say a huge groundswelling of people who do services for the government. And it's actually a bit more difficult to sell product to the government. They'd rather buy service than product, the way the financing is set up. So it's harder, but I've been pretty rigid about let's maintain ourselves as a product company, not a services company. It's easy enough to be pulled into the 1,000, consulting groups that are around the Beltway.
Yeah. Hello, Randy. Welcome to Product Growth Story. So happy to have you at the show. And you are one of the leaders at InQuisient. I'd love to hear about your background and what led you to build this SaaS product.
All right. Well, that's a big question. But background is kind of a long story. By training, I'm an applied mathematician. So applied maths kind of led to large data problems early on, pre-internet even. So how do you collect a lot of data? How do you manage it? How do you send it around where it needs to go? How do you secure it? So that was an early part of the career, building sort of robots and machines that understood what to do with lots of data. I bounced around, luckily, to different careers. So not only robotics, but then biometrics. So measuring eyeballs and making contact lenses. Also in the medical space, Medicaid and Medicare management for the state of Hawaii.
Lots of big projects.
And lots of big projects. So a definite exposure to large data problems. What kinds of things do you have to build every single time you do that? What's common? What's different? So I kind of built a perspective that there was about 80 or 90% of commonality to every large data model. You always talk about people, you always talk about organizations, you always talk about addresses and money. So there's, no matter what you're doing specifically, there's a huge amount of commonality.
That reminds me, I had an uncle who showed me a little bit about programming when I was young, and he always said, start with the data model. Like always before you build anything, you need to fully understand, what are we storing?
That's an excellent advice from him. Yeah. If you get that wrong, everything's hard afterwards. If you get that right, a lot of things just flow naturally. So very important piece, to the whole thing. And it turns out not data models, but process models as well. So why are you doing things and how should it flow is just as key, get that right as the data structures themselves. So immediately before founding this company, 2004, I was in the world of requirements management. So this was my first sort of foray into the world of complexity, of building large, complex systems, rockets, airplanes, large systems where requirements were absolutely mandatory in millions of them. And you had to check everyone off before you want to launch the thing because it's going to blow up, like important stuff. So also back at that time, early 2000s, like the conceptual model of the world was not SaaS yet. You're either like America Online, sell every person in the country something for $9.99 to make some money, or I learned by selling large federal government contracts, you can sell one copy of the software to somebody building something important, and you can make your money by selling one.
Different kinds of hard, like it's very different.
Yes, exactly. So it was an eye-opener, though, to me, that someone would actually pay enough money to run your business on with only a few sales instead of millions of sales, So switching gears to that model, what's the hardest problem that we could see inside the federal government? Where are they struggling? And that turned into enterprise architecture. So we found that the U.S. Army actually was struggling with understanding. They had huge printouts of enterprise architecture diagrams and bubbles and lines going everywhere. And who does this, who does that, and they would
machine ever drawn somewhere.
And literally teams and teams of people and cubicles, and they plot these things out on 6-foot wide papers and stick them on the wall. But then that's where they stopped, and no development team, no procurement team, no general was able to see it or do anything about it. So architecture got a bad rap as not really contributing to the organization. And then we said, okay, that's a problem we can solve because underneath of that's data. And what we want to do is take those drawings, turn it into data, and make it visible to the stakeholders, like the
So
general.
like making it easier to understand what are the implications to the architecture that I have to live with, or is that the kind of value that you're providing, or how does it? I'm just trying to imagine this user. I'm not I don't work in the government or the military, but I have had to deal with, enterprise architects, and I'm just curious, how did they find value there? What was it?
Yeah, so the questions, it would turn into a problem like from the top. So the general would say, can I go to war, right? Do I have the capability to do this thing that I'm about to do? And he asked the next tier of guys down, are we ready? And they said, well, sir, we don't know.
Yeah.
Let us go check, And then they go down and they say, well, we can draw you a new picture that shows the readiness posture and some more bubbles, and we'll have a meeting in 3 weeks and we'll tell you, what's going on. And then he says, well, that's done. People are deployed by then. We can't get value unless you tell me like today. So turning the top level questions into a timely response by real data analysis and query was one big directive. If you imagine the architecture in the center of a wheel of spikes, like those guys are one consumer of what we can do
and there'd
today.
be every other potential stakeholder with access.
Everybody has their own lens on it, and there's procurement people. What do we need to buy to make those things happen? What do we need to maintain and secure in the IT stack to support
what you
those
described
things?
about this general and this question? It's like the generic. I mean, it's not generic what you described, but that is like a generalized, that is like the business problem for every executive. You have this question, and then the data is always out of date. It takes a team and a study to figure it out, and you still have to move anyway. And this is like a very common, I feel like I've seen a version of this also in like manufacturing. They want to know, like, can we install the machine? Like, well, all the drawings are out of date and we don't even know what's there. And it's very similar.
Yes. It's the same. And can we move to the cloud? Can we deploy this new capability? Can we, switch to this other sales model? All of those top-down problems, wide data input from the rest of the organization, right? To sort of be able to do that in an agile way and real-time response. And you don't want the meeting. What you want is that C-suite guy to just log in and look at his dashboard. And he says, oh, I see that we're having trouble on this thing, or I see we're ready to go. So ideally, you're shooting for that. And I think you hit the nail on the head here. All the problems are the same at some level of understanding. So what we want to do is deliver a platform that allows you, the end user, to tell the platform what it is you're interested in. In other words, we're not going to put a straitjacket on you and say, this is how you must conform and run your ERP and HR and all that. You're going to do what you do. You have your IT stack, you have existing tools, your Jira is generating data, and your spreadsheet captures some finance, whatever you got. We want you to be able to use your data in your format, but integrate it with the rest of the corporation's data in this format and deliver the same sort of value to upstream. So we saw that as the opportunity. How do we generally deliver a robust, secured, data managed platform that has all the stuff that you have to build anyway, sort of in the can for you if you like it, but it's ready for you to drag your dashboard around, make it the way you want, add some more data structure, link things together that maybe nobody conceived of and you're uniquely you, which you are. And then you're up and running in, let's say, a couple of weeks instead of a couple of years of somebody's development time. So we attacked it that way.
That's what InQuisient does. And that is like, that sounds like an extremely difficult problem, because I'm just imagining all the different formats and like weird, arcane, maybe not documented formats that you had to parse and make sense of somehow. That sounds like all the dirty work that you had to do was probably enormous. Is that right?
Yes, except you can make some insightful, cool tricks at what we call meta layers of that problem. So you can understand data. The complexity of data is one thing. if you step up one and you say, what are the structures that are holding that data? There's data about that. And you step up another one and you say, well, how do structures that hold data behave? There's
Yeah.
relationships here and there's keys there
Semantical
and whatnot.
search.
You can define all those meta layers. Yeah. So once you sort of wrap your head around meta thinking, it turns out that you can make magic happen by manipulating the right meta layer. And then it simultaneously defines the data model you want and the interfaces that go with it and the security that underpins it. So you just articulate the right data to the platform and it knows, in some great way, here's the screen I need to show and here's the data I'm catching and feeding back and here's the people allowed to
That's
do
amazing. And I'm curious, so how do you, especially thinking of your background, how do you go from tackling this problem to I can actually sell this software, which must have been expensive to develop, especially when you started? How did you go about finding your first customer for something like this?
Well, I got it all, unfortunately or fortunately, it's personal contacts. So I happen to work and live in the Washington, D.C. area, which means that there's a lot of people who have their fingers into the federal workforce in some way or another, which means that thinking about spinning up the business, you have talks with people that and one or of those people was, very confident. Hey, I know people in the Army that have this real bad problem. So you kind of pull the friend string and you say, well, let's see if we can go talk. And then that turned into a very helpful organization, 8A company, Cherokee Information Systems. I'll just shout out to them. And they said, hey, you guys, I understand, are going to be new. We love to help new guys. We'll put you as the sub on our contract and, pay you the hours to answer the general's questions, which basically let us be service consultant people during the first year where we were building the deliverable product.
Excellent. Yeah.
At the same
It's
time.
excellent to start this move. I've seen many times to start with consulting or solutions first before you, as a way to bridge you to having a developed product. 'Cause at least you can talk more easily and you're getting paid for it as well. Yeah.
Yes, there's, I'll say, a huge groundswelling of people who do services for the government. And it's actually a bit more difficult to sell product to the government. They'd rather buy service than product, the way the financing is set up. So it's harder, but I've been pretty rigid about let's maintain ourselves as a product company, not a services company. It's easy enough to be pulled into the 1,000, consulting groups that are around the Beltway.
Yeah, great. So I'm curious, what are you the most excited about for InQuisient in 2025? There's so much. I feel like right now AI is like the topic. I don't know if you're tired of it yet, but yeah, just with all the changes in software development, what are you the most excited for what you can do with InQuisient?
Yeah, the roadmap is definitely some AI. So right now we're leveraging AI in some pretty great ways where we're not writing LLMs or, creating our own AI models or anything. We are leveraging existing ones. So one huge benefits, right? We understand these meta layers of our customers' information model. So we have built-in context for the AI engines that is, I think, superior than what you might get otherwise. So we're able to tell the AI, hey, here's the data world that we're living in, and here's all the connections that we know about, and maybe you can help me fill in some of these gaps, which is a general challenge, right? How do you fill in appropriately missing data that might be very useful? And if you just generically solve that problem, which I think we do, all of a sudden you can ask it to very specifically complete things. So if I have a strategic plan, for example, what should my best performance measures be and who should be implementing them on which project and which team members can be assigned, and all of those generative problems fall out the complex data models in a very nice way. So I love to do that, and I love to still provide value from the architecture. So these architects that for decades have been in the back room with nobody caring, now they are really the requirements engineers of the future. So you can take their very explicit models, processes, decision trees, all the things they create, and convert those directly, let's say, into Jira backlogs and agile development efforts. So here's all the stuff, here's all the messages and the actors and the transfer points and all the things you need to know, Mr. Developer. Yeah, everything there comes out of architecture ultimately. And then if you remember the beginning of the general still wants to know. So architecture turns into the middle linchpin, and am I on track goes through the architecture to the development team and say, yes, sir, our pace is such and such, and we're going to have that capability on September 14th, So all those questions become much more real by linking the action to the direction.
I love it. I love it. I'm just wishing I had this back when I was in big projects. It would have been amazing. Would have been amazing.
There you go.
Well, thank you so much, Randy, for the conversation. And I'm just curious if there's what advice, as we're wrapping up here, what advice would you give to other founders that are looking to sell enterprise software or government software? How would you advise they get started? If they identify this real serious business problem, where would you go from there?
I kind of like the way we did it. It depends where you live and who you know in the very beginning. So if it's friends and family, I think you're sort of going to go down the way we did, which is let's do some services to cover the bill in the beginning. If you're a Silicon Valley lucky, then there's most of the time a lot of money thrown at a startup that, you get a little bit of luxury mode. But I think those people actually aren't tested properly. I'll say it that way. So you get too much money in the beginning. You don't have to be lean. You can make a lot of mistakes, and then you can fail easily. So, and you don't have your skin in it. So you do it where, you're mortgaging your house and you're struggling and
it changes the way you play the game. That's for sure.
$10,000, you're doing something different. So I think that's informative. And, by the time you've done that 20 years, you're kind of jaded about it, but it does make a difference on what kind of company you end up with.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Randy.
No problem. Enjoyed talking to you.